The kitchen felt too quiet for a moment that should have changed everything. Midnight pressed against the windows. A single light above the table cast a soft glow over two people sitting across from each other like strangers forced into the same room. Between them sat a small white object that carried more weight than either of them wanted to admit. Two lines. Clear. Final. Susan kept her hands folded tightly in front of her, steady on the outside, even though her heartbeat refused to slow. Simon stared at the test as if staring longer might make it disappear. "You're pregnant?" he asked. His voice was careful, measured, almost professional. "Yes," Susan said quietly. Silence filled the space again. No excitement. No laughter. No disbelief turning into joy. She searched his face for something familiar, something warm, but all she saw was thought, calculation, distance. She swallowed and said the name that had been living between them for months. Aaron. Simon blinked once. The smallest hesitation crossed his face, brief but undeniable. That pause said more than words ever could. You know the feeling when someone is still physically beside you, yet somehow already gone. The conversations continue, routines stay the same, but something invisible has shifted. You sense it long before anyone admits it. Have you ever felt someone drifting away while pretending everything was normal? Have you ever known the truth before the truth was spoken out loud? Susan had lived with that feeling for months. Tonight, it finally had a shape. Simon leaned back slightly, rubbing his forehead. "Susan, there's something I've been trying to explain." She gave a small nod, calm but firm. "You don't need to explain," because she already understood. This wasn't a loud betrayal. No slammed doors, no shouting, just a slow movement of attention from one person to another until the distance became impossible to ignore. The man sitting across from her was a celebrated CEO. The world admired his success. Cameras loved him. Investors trusted him. Employees followed him. Yet here at home, where success meant simply showing up, he looked unsure of what to do. Susan rested her palm lightly over her stomach, a quiet instinct she hadn't yet fully accepted. She had imagined this moment differently years ago. She once believed news like this would bring them closer, remind them why they built a life together in the first place. Instead, she felt as though she was announcing life inside a relationship already fading. His eyes lifted toward her, guilt creeping in. "I didn't mean for things to get this complicated." She almost laughed, not out of humor but disbelief. Life was complicated. Love was complicated. Neglect, though, was usually simple. It happened one ignored moment at a time. The room held the weight of everything unsaid, late nights at work, missed conversations, distracted glances, messages turned away from view. Susan took a steady breath. "I'm not going to compete for my own husband," she said softly. Her voice didn't shake. That frightened him more than anger would have. The tension in the room tightened, pulling viewers straight into the center of a story already at its breaking point. Because this isn't just about betrayal. It's about what happens when ambition grows louder than connection. It's about a woman who helped build a dream, only to realize she no longer belonged inside it. And it's about a choice that would change 3 lives before the night was over. Before we move further into this story, welcome back to Mr. Brugman's Stories, where powerful stories don't just entertain, they teach life-changing lessons. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button because it helps us share stories like this across YouTube. Today, we embark on a new journey, one meant to bring peace, love, and understanding to the world. Thank you for being part of our beautiful family. Your support, your comments, your engagement, they are the reason I continue creating stories that uplift the heart and strengthen the soul. God bless you as you listen to this story. I hope you have a blessed day. Now, stay with me closely, because this moment at the kitchen table is only the beginning. Right now, Susan is holding 2 secrets at once, new life growing inside her, and the realization that the man she once built everything with may already belong to another world. What made a successful marriage fall apart without anyone noticing? How does a woman walk away while carrying twins she hasn't even told him about yet? And why, 10 years later, would the same man who drifted away come back asking for one more chance to see her again? The answers begin here, in silence, in hesitation, in a truth that arrived too late to stop what was coming next. The night isn't over. The story is just getting started. Now we rewind. Hours earlier. The ballroom glowed like success had decided to take physical form. Crystal chandeliers hung low from the ceiling, refracting light across polished marble floors. Laughter rose in waves. Glasses clinked in celebration. Conversations floated through the air. Investment numbers, expansion plans, strategic acquisitions. Everything about the room said victory. Susan stood beside Simon Crawford as photographers called his name. He smiled with ease, shoulders squared, confidence practiced. To anyone watching, they were the image of achievement. The visionary CEO and the wife who had stood with him since the company existed only as a risky idea and unpaid invoices. Susan smiled when the cameras flashed, but her smile required effort. The noise in the room felt different to her tonight. Louder, more distant at the same time. Simon leaned toward a board member, laughing at something said in a low voice. Susan watched the way he shifted his stance, slightly angled away from her, open toward the crowd. A subtle change, almost invisible. She noticed because she had spent years reading him without words. Then she saw Erin. Erin moved through the ballroom with a tablet in one hand and calm precision in her step. She wasn't dressed louder than anyone else, but she didn't need to be. Her confidence did the work for her. When Erin approached, Simon straightened almost unconsciously. "Your 9:30 with the investors is confirmed," Erin said softly, "and the press interview was moved to next week." Simon nodded. Good catch. Their exchange was efficient, professional, but Susan saw the extra half-second of eye contact, the faint smile that didn't match business tone, the familiarity that lived just beneath formal words. No one else in the room would notice it. Susan did. She reminded herself not to overthink. A CEO and his assistant would naturally be close. Long hours demanded coordination. Trust was necessary. Still, something in her chest tightened. Simon used to glance toward her during events like this, subtle looks asking, "How am I doing?" He once relied on her steady presence more than he admitted publicly. Tonight, he didn't look back. A major investor approached, shaking Simon's hand enthusiastically. "This quarter's projections are incredible. You're building something unstoppable." Simon smiled. "We're just getting started." Susan nodded politely beside him. "We." The word sounded hollow. She remembered nights years ago when they sat at their small kitchen table with spreadsheets spread out, debating every dollar. Back then, we meant both of them equally. Now it felt like branding. Music swelled as the MC announced Simon's upcoming speech. Applause rolled across the ballroom. Susan stepped slightly aside to let Simon move toward the stage. Erin followed 2 steps behind him. That's when she noticed something else. As Simon adjusted his tie, Erin reached up instinctively and straightened it for him. A small gesture. Quick, efficient, but too familiar. Susan's breath caught for a moment. Simon didn't pull away. He didn't look surprised. He simply continued walking. Susan stayed where she was, watching him ascend the stage while Erin positioned herself near the front with her tablet ready. The spotlight found him easily. He spoke with conviction about leadership, growth, innovation. The crowd hung on every word. Susan listened carefully. She recognized entire phrases. She had helped craft those ideas years ago when the company's mission still felt personal. Tonight, her contribution existed only in memory. As applause erupted again, she scanned the room. Couples stood close together. Colleagues leaned in to talk. She suddenly felt alone in a crowded ballroom. Her stomach tightened again. Not sharp pain, just a subtle discomfort she couldn't ignore. She placed a hand lightly against her abdomen, telling herself it was nerves. She barely touched the champagne handed to her earlier. Across the room, Simon stepped down from the stage. Erin moved quickly to meet him. They spoke in low voices, heads close. Susan tried to catch fragments of conversation but couldn't. Simon laughed, a full laugh this time. She realized she hadn't heard that sound directed at her in months. A board member approached Susan. "You must be proud. He's extraordinary." She smiled automatically. Yes, he's worked very hard. That was true. So had she, but only one of them stood under the spotlight. When Simon finally returned to her side, his energy felt charged from the attention. "Everything okay?" he asked. The question came fast, like a habit. "I'm fine," she said. He nodded and scanned the room again. That was the moment something shifted inside her. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a quiet recognition. She wasn't imagining distance. She was witnessing it. Still, she pushed the thought away. Marriages go through phases. Stress changes people. Success demands time. She told herself she was tired. She told herself she was overanalyzing. She told herself not to read meaning into small gestures. But the truth remained steady beneath those excuses. She felt like a guest at an event celebrating a life she once helped build. And the night was only halfway over. The applause followed Simon long after he stepped off the stage. Susan slipped away before anyone noticed. The hallway outside the ballroom felt cooler, quieter. The sound of celebration dulled behind heavy doors as she walked toward the restroom, heels clicking against polished floors. Each step felt like distance growing between two versions of her life, the one everyone admired and the one she barely understood anymore. Inside, the lights were softer. Mirrors stretched across the wall, reflecting women adjusting dresses, fixing makeup, checking smiles before returning to the crowd. Susan waited until the room emptied before leaning lightly against the marble counter. She stared at her reflection. Everything looked normal. Hair in place, makeup untouched, composed, yet her hands trembled slightly when she placed them flat against the counter. Her stomach turned again, the same quiet nausea that had followed her for days. She closed her eyes, thinking back through the week. The exhaustion, the missed cycle she hadn't talked about, the strange sensitivity to smells. A thought surfaced slowly. Pregnant, the word settled in her chest, heavy and uncertain. For a moment, hope pushed through the confusion. Maybe this was the moment that could pull them back together. Maybe a child would remind Simon of who they used to be. Two people building something side by side, not two strangers sharing a home. Then she remembered how alive he looked while speaking to Aaron. The hope faded just as quickly as it arrived. She straightened her posture and forced herself to breathe slowly. Nothing was certain yet. She refused to build expectations on guesses. Still, she couldn't ignore the feeling that something important was shifting beneath her feet. When she returned to the ballroom, the event felt louder than before. Conversations blended into a blur of polite smiles and strategic introductions. Simon was surrounded again, and Aaron remained close by, guiding schedules, whispering reminders. Susan watched for a few minutes. She didn't feel jealousy. She felt absence. Later that night, once the event finally ended, she rode home beside Simon in silence. City lights streaked across the car windows as he scrolled through messages on his phone. She turned slightly toward the glass, watching reflections instead of trying to talk. He kissed her forehead when they arrived home, absent-minded and brief, then disappeared into his office to take another call. Susan stood alone in their kitchen, listening to the quiet hum of appliances and the distant sound of his voice behind a closed door. The house felt enormous, too large for two people drifting apart. The next afternoon, she drove across town to a community gathering she hadn't attended in months. Music played from speakers near a small park. People greeted each other with warmth that didn't depend on status or business cards. Plates of food moved between hands. Children ran past laughing. Here, conversations happened face to face, not through schedules. Susan felt her shoulders loosen slightly. An older woman she had known for years pulled her aside, studying her carefully. "You look tired," she said gently. Susan smiled. "Just busy." The woman shook her head softly. "Busy can make you forget yourself." Susan hesitated, unsure how much to say. The woman squeezed her hand. "Don't disappear inside somebody else's success. Keep yourself." The words landed deeper than expected. Keep yourself. Susan repeated them silently as she watched families gather around long tables, sharing stories that had nothing to do with achievement or recognition. She realized how long it had been since she felt truly present anywhere. Driving home later, she replayed the evening in her mind. The laughter, the ease, the way people looked at each other when they spoke, fully attentive. The contrast with her life felt sharp. That night, Simon returned late again. "I've got another strategy dinner tomorrow," he said casually while loosening his tie. She nodded. "Okay." No argument, no questions. She noticed how easily silence filled the spaces where conversation used to live. After he went upstairs, Susan sat alone in the living room, the elder's words repeating quietly. Keep yourself. Had she already lost that part of herself? Had supporting Simon's rise slowly erased her own voice? The thought unsettled her. By morning, the discomfort in her body returned stronger. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror, counting dates in her head. The realization felt unavoidable now. She needed to know. The pharmacy was quiet when she walked in. Bright aisles, lined with everyday items, made the decision feel strangely ordinary. She picked up a pregnancy test quickly, almost hiding it among other purchases as if secrecy itself could protect her from whatever answer waited. At the checkout, the cashier smiled politely, unaware that this small box might redefine an entire future. Back in the car, Susan rested her hands on the steering wheel for several moments before starting the engine. Fear and hope sat side by side inside her. She imagined telling Simon. She imagined his reaction. She imagined for one fleeting second joy returning to their home. But another image followed immediately. Simon leaning toward Erin in the ballroom, fully engaged in a way she hadn't seen directed at her in a long time. The uncertainty pressed down on her chest. When she arrived home, she placed the box carefully on the bathroom counter. It sat there quietly, waiting. The house was still. Susan stared at it, realizing that whatever happened next would confirm more than pregnancy. It would confirm whether her marriage was something she could still believe in, or something already slipping away. She turned off the bathroom light and walked out, leaving the unopened box behind. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow, she would face the answer. Morning arrived slowly. Light filtered through the curtains, touching the bathroom counter where the unopened box waited. Susan stood in the doorway for several seconds before stepping inside. The house was quiet. Simon had already left for an early meeting, leaving behind a short message on the kitchen counter about a busy day ahead. She closed the bathroom door gently. Her hands moved almost automatically as she opened the package, following instructions she barely needed to read. The process took only minutes, yet every second stretched longer than it should. When she set the test down, the waiting felt unbearable. She stared at the sink instead of looking directly, counting breaths, listening to the faint sounds of traffic outside. Then she turned. 2 lines, clear and undeniable. Susan sat slowly on the edge of the bathtub, the result resting in her hands like something fragile. A smile flickered briefly across her face before uncertainty pushed it away. Pregnant. The word brought warmth first, a sudden image of tiny hands, of laughter filling spaces that had grown too quiet. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine Simon's reaction from years earlier, when they still celebrated small victories together. But reality returned quickly. She pictured his distracted gaze at the gala, his attention shifting away from her without realizing he was doing it. Joy and fear pressed against each other inside her, neither winning. She rested a hand over her stomach, trying to ground herself. "This changes everything," she whispered. But she wasn't sure in what direction. She wrapped the test carefully in tissue and placed it inside a drawer, as though hiding it would buy her time. Tonight, she told herself. She would tell Simon tonight. The day moved slowly. She tried to work, answered emails, sorted paperwork, but her focus drifted. Her mind kept replaying possible conversations. Would he be happy? Would he feel trapped? Would this bring them closer or push them further apart? By evening, she heard the front door open. Simon entered, still talking on his phone, pacing slightly as he ended the call. His attention remained fixed on the screen even after stepping into the kitchen. "Long day," he said automatically, placing his phone down for only a moment before picking it up again. Susan watched him quietly. "I was thinking we could have dinner together tonight," she said. He hesitated. "I've got to review some numbers first. Maybe later?" She nodded, hiding disappointment. Later never came. He ate quickly while reading messages. When she tried to start conversation, his responses were polite but short, like someone answering questions during a meeting rather than speaking with his wife. His phone buzzed again. A small smile crossed his face as he typed a reply. Susan noticed he angled the screen away without thinking. It was a tiny movement, almost unconscious. Still, it landed heavily. Over the next few days, small things began stacking up. He came home later than usual. He took calls in separate rooms. He laughed softly at messages, but rarely at anything she said. When she mentioned feeling tired, he suggested she rest more without asking why. Each moment alone meant little. Together, they painted a picture she didn't want to see. Susan kept the pregnancy secret close, waiting for the right moment that never seemed to arrive. One evening, she stood in the hallway watching him pack for a short business trip. "I feel like I hardly see you anymore," she said gently. He paused, then gave a tired smile. "Just a busy season. It'll calm down soon." The answer sounded practiced. She wanted to believe him. Instead, she felt herself slipping further outside his world. That night, she lay awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing while questions circled endlessly. Would telling him now feel like connection or pressure? Would he hear the joy in it or only responsibility? Her hand rested over her stomach again, instinctive now. She wasn't just protecting herself anymore. She was protecting the life growing inside her. The next morning, Simon left early once more. The house felt emptier than before. Susan walked into the bathroom and opened the drawer where she had hidden the test. The sight of those 2 lines still made her chest tighten, a reminder that life was moving forward whether she felt ready or not. She rehearsed the words silently. I'm pregnant. Simple words, yet impossible to say when everything else felt uncertain. As the day passed, she watched for signs that the distance between them might close even slightly. Instead, it widened. A message flashed briefly on his phone while it rested on the counter. He picked it up quickly, smiling in a way she hadn't seen directed at her lately. Something inside her settled. Not acceptance, not anger, just growing clarity. She realized she had been waiting for a perfect moment to share life-changing news, while the relationship itself slowly drifted farther away. Still, she held on to hope. Tonight, she decided again. Tonight she would tell him, because secrets, even hopeful ones, couldn't stay hidden forever. The evening began like many others, calm on the surface. Simon stood near the kitchen counter adjusting his jacket while scanning messages on his phone. Susan watched him from across the room, searching for the right moment to speak. The words sat ready inside her, pressing forward, but something in his posture made her wait. I've got a strategy dinner tonight, he said, slipping the phone into his pocket without looking up. It might run late. The explanation came quickly, almost too smooth. Susan nodded slowly. Where? He hesitated just long enough to notice. Downtown, a few investors, nothing exciting. She forced a small smile. Okay. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead before leaving. The gesture felt automatic, practiced, like routine rather than intention. The door closed softly behind him. Silence returned to the house. Susan stood still for several moments, holding back the urge to call him back and say the words she had been carrying for days. I'm pregnant. Instead, she turned toward the living room, trying to settle into the evening. She opened a book but read the same sentence twice without understanding it. The quiet felt heavier than usual. Hours passed. The clock moved closer to midnight. A faint sound came from the hallway, a notification tone she recognized. Simon's shared tablet remained connected to the home system, syncing calendars and reminders automatically. Usually she ignored it. Tonight, the screen lit up again. She glanced over casually at first, then she froze. A calendar reminder glowed clearly on the display. Dinner confirmed. Private reservation. 2 names, Simon and Aaron. Her breathing slowed rather than quickened. No rush of anger. No sudden panic. Just stillness. She read it again to make sure she wasn't misunderstanding. The message remained unchanged. The pieces that hadn't quite fit together suddenly aligned with quiet precision. The long nights, the distracted smiles at his phone, the energy she saw between them at the gala. She sat down slowly. The room felt exactly the same as it had moments earlier, yet everything inside her shifted. There was no dramatic collapse, only clarity. She replayed recent conversations in her mind, the careful explanations, the polite distance, the way he avoided deeper discussions. She realized she had been protecting him from a truth she already sensed. The betrayal wasn't loud. It arrived softly, confirmed by simple words on a screen. Susan stared at the tablet until it dimmed again, the darkness reflecting her expression back at her. She wasn't angry yet. She felt tired. Tired of trying to interpret signals. Tired of convincing herself things were fine. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach. She thought about the hidden pregnancy test upstairs, about the life growing quietly inside her while her marriage changed shape without her permission. She laughed once under her breath, short and disbelieving, because the situation felt almost too simple now. No mystery remained. She stood and walked toward the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water she barely drank. The house felt unfamiliar, as if she were visiting someone else's life. Memories surfaced unexpectedly. Late nights at the kitchen table years earlier, planning the company's first risks together, shared excitement when success finally started to come, promises about always staying connected no matter how busy life became. When had that changed? Not tonight. Not with one message. It had happened slowly, unnoticed, like a quiet shift in gravity. She sat back down and stared at nothing in particular, The urge to call Simon surged briefly, to demand explanations, to ask direct questions. She resisted, because she already knew what she would hear. Excuses, confusion, timing. None of it would change the reality sitting in front of her. By the time headlights flashed across the windows near midnight, Susan felt steady again. The front door opened. Simon walked in, loosening his tie, a faint smell of expensive restaurant air clinging to his jacket. "You're awake," he said, surprised. "I couldn't sleep," she answered. He smiled lightly. "Long dinner." She nodded once. No accusation, no raised voice. He moved toward the kitchen, unaware that the truth had already arrived. She watched him pour water, noticing how relaxed he seemed, how ordinary the moment felt for him. That realization hurt more than anything else. This wasn't an emergency in his mind. It was simply part of his life now. He glanced toward her. "Everything okay?" She held his gaze. "Yes," she said quietly. For now, because she understood something important in that moment. Confrontation without clarity only creates noise. And she wasn't interested in noise. She wanted honesty, real honesty. That would come soon enough. Simon headed upstairs, saying he needed sleep before an early meeting. Susan remained where she was, listening to his footsteps fade. The house settled into silence again. She leaned back in her chair, the realization fully settled inside her. She wasn't imagining anything. She wasn't insecure. She wasn't overreacting. She was being left behind while still standing beside him. And tomorrow, she decided, there would be no more waiting. She would place the truth between them. All of it. The pregnancy, the distance, the name neither of them could pretend not to know anymore. Tonight, she simply sat in the quiet, letting the reality sink in. The first real crack had finally become visible. The house felt still when Simon came downstairs the next morning. Sunlight stretched across the kitchen floor, soft and ordinary, almost mocking how heavy the air felt between them. Susan had been awake for hours. The pregnancy test sat hidden in her pocket, its weight small but impossible to ignore. Simon poured coffee and glanced at his phone before looking up. "You're up early." "I didn't sleep much," she said. He nodded absent-mindedly, already scrolling. For a moment she considered waiting again. Waiting for the right time. Waiting for him to notice the seriousness in her face. Then she realized there would never be a perfect moment. "Simon," she said quietly, "we need to talk." Something in her tone made him pause. He set the phone down and pulled out a chair across from her. The kitchen suddenly felt too quiet. Susan placed the test carefully on the table between them. Simon stared at it, confused at first, then frozen. "You're pregnant?" he asked. "Yes." The word lingered in the air. She watched his expression closely, searching for joy or surprise, something she could hold on to. Instead, she saw hesitation, a quick flicker of thought moving behind his eyes. "How far along?" he asked softly. The question landed like cold water. She swallowed. "Long enough to know I needed to tell you." He leaned back, rubbing his forehead, silent for several seconds. Susan felt the space between them widen. There was no celebration, no sudden smile, only uncertainty. She spoke again before courage slipped away. "And I know about Aaron." His eyes lifted sharply. That single reaction confirmed everything. He exhaled slowly, shoulders dropping as if a secret he'd been balancing for too long had finally been spoken aloud. "Susan," he began, voice low. "It's complicated." She shook her head once. "No, it's simple." He stared at the table. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said quietly. She almost laughed, but the sound never came. "No one plans for this. It happens because people stop paying attention." He looked at her fully now, guilt finally visible. "I've been trying to figure out how to say it." She held his gaze. "Say what?" He hesitated again. That hesitation hurt more than any direct answer. "I feel disconnected," he admitted. "From everything. From us. Work got overwhelming. Things changed." She listened without interrupting. No shouting. No accusations thrown like weapons. Just exhaustion on both sides. "Do you love her?" Susan asked. The question hung between them. Simon didn't answer immediately. He looked away first. That was enough. Susan inhaled slowly, steadying herself. She expected tears, but none came. The pain felt too clear for tears. "I kept thinking maybe I was imagining it," she said softly. I kept telling myself it was stress, that we were just busy. He leaned forward. I never wanted to hurt you. You didn't wake up one day and decide to, she replied. You just stopped seeing me. The words landed heavily. Simon's voice cracked slightly. I didn't know how to fix it. You didn't try. Silence followed. Outside, a car passed. A bird called somewhere near the window. Everyday sounds continued, indifferent to the moment unfolding inside the kitchen. Susan placed her hand over her stomach. I'm not going to compete for my own husband, she said calmly. His eyes widened slightly. Susan, let's not make decisions right now. We can figure this out. She shook her head. The decision was already made. Long before this conversation, he stood suddenly, pacing a few steps before stopping. I'm confused. I didn't expect things to go this far. She watched him carefully. For the first time, she saw not the confident CEO admired by thousands, but a man who hadn't anticipated consequences. I needed you, she said quietly, and you weren't here. He turned toward her, desperation creeping in. What do you want me to say? The truth, she answered. He closed his eyes briefly. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. I don't know who I am anymore. The honesty surprised her. For a moment she felt sympathy, not for his choices, but for his confusion. But sympathy wasn't enough to rebuild trust. She stood slowly, chair scraping lightly against the floor. I'm leaving, she said. He froze. Don't do this. I'm not leaving because of one moment, she said. I'm leaving because we stopped being us a long time ago. His hands opened helplessly. We built this life together. She nodded once. Yes, and somewhere along the way, you kept building without me. The words settled between them, like final truth. She picked up the pregnancy test and held it gently, protecting it now, not as a secret, but as a future. Simon stared at her, fear replacing guilt. What about the baby? He asked quietly. She met his eyes. I'll figure it out. He stepped closer, then stopped, unsure whether he was allowed to reach for her anymore. Neither moved. The distance felt permanent. Susan walked toward the hallway, her steps calm, steady. At the doorway, she paused without turning back. I hope you find what you're looking for, she said softly. Then, she left the kitchen. Behind her, Simon remained standing alone, surrounded by a life that suddenly felt fragile. The conversation had ended without shouting, without drama, just honesty arriving too late to change anything. And for Susan, the decision felt clear. She wasn't walking away from love. She was walking toward herself. The house felt different the next morning, not because anything had changed physically. The same wide hallways, polished floors, and carefully chosen furniture remained untouched, but because Susan no longer saw it as home. She moved quietly through the bedroom, opening drawers with deliberate care. A suitcase rested on the bed, half filled with clothes she actually wore, not the ones chosen for appearances at corporate events. No shouting echoed from downstairs. No dramatic confrontation followed the night before. Simon remained in his office, door closed, giving her space he didn't know how to fill. Susan folded a sweater slowly, pausing as memories surfaced. Long nights spent planning the company's future. Early mornings when they rushed out together believing they were building something shared. Those memories didn't disappear. They simply no longer guided her decisions. She packed family photos first, the ones that mattered personally rather than professionally. Then notebooks filled with ideas she had written years ago, pieces of herself she had set aside while helping Simon rise. Each item felt less like leaving and more like reclaiming. The silence between rooms felt heavier than arguments would have been. At one point, Simon appeared in the doorway, watching her without stepping inside. You don't have to do this today, he said quietly. She kept folding clothes. Yes, I do. He shifted uncomfortably. We can talk more. Figure things out. She looked up briefly. We already talked. He had no answer. The suitcase clicked shut with finality. Downstairs, she walked through the kitchen where the conversation had ended hours earlier. The chairs remained slightly angled from where they sat, a frozen reminder of the moment everything changed. She paused near the window, resting her hand lightly against her stomach. She wasn't just leaving for herself anymore. That thought steadied her. When she opened the front closet, she chose practical shoes over the elegant ones lined carefully on shelves. The decision felt symbolic, comfort over image, movement over presentation. Simon appeared again as she reached for her coat. Where will you go? he asked. "I'll figure it out," she said gently. His voice softened. "You don't have to struggle." She met his eyes. "This isn't about money." That truth landed between them. For the first time, Simon looked truly uncertain, like a man watching the consequences of his choices become real. She picked up her suitcase. The weight surprised her, though not as much as how light she felt underneath it. At the door, he spoke again. "We built this together," he said quietly. She nodded. "Yes. And somewhere along the way you stopped noticing I was still here." His expression tightened, but she didn't wait for a response. She stepped outside. Cool air met her face. The morning sun felt brighter than expected, almost harsh after years spent inside controlled environments. Her car looked smaller than she remembered compared to the large driveway and manicured landscaping behind her. She placed the suitcase in the trunk and paused. For a brief second, fear surfaced. What was she doing? She was pregnant. Alone. Walking away from comfort into uncertainty. But another feeling followed quickly. Relief. The constant tension she had carried for months loosened slightly. Simon stood in the doorway, watching. Neither moved toward the other. There was no dramatic goodbye, no desperate plea. Just two people standing on opposite sides of a decision that could no longer be undone. She slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. As the house disappeared behind her, the reality of what she had done settled in fully. She had no clear plan, no certainty about the future, only a quiet determination to build something healthier than what she had left. The drive felt longer than usual. City streets passed in a blur as she replayed the last 24 hours. Every moment felt sharp, like her senses had awakened after months of emotional numbness. She reached a small apartment temporarily offered by a friend from her community. Simple, modest, nothing like the life she had just left. Inside, the space echoed when she stepped in. No grand kitchen, no sweeping views, just practicality. She set the suitcase down and looked around. The uncertainty hit hard. This was real now. She sat on the edge of the bed and exhaled slowly, hand resting over her stomach again. "I don't know exactly how," she whispered softly, "but we'll figure it out." For the first time in a long while, her thoughts weren't tied to Simon's schedule or the company's demands. The future felt unwritten, scary, honest. Outside, city sounds drifted through the window, ordinary life continuing without concern for wealth or titles. Susan realized independence didn't feel dramatic. It felt quiet, practical, earned one small choice at a time. She leaned back and closed her eyes briefly. The uncertainty remained, but something else appeared alongside it. Freedom. And with that realization, the first true step of rebuilding had begun. The first few weeks felt like learning how to breathe again. Susan's new apartment was small enough that every sound carried. The hum of the refrigerator, footsteps from the hallway outside, rain tapping against the window at night. There was no extra space to disappear into, no quiet luxury softening the edges of reality. Everything felt closer, more immediate. At first, the simplicity comforted her. Then, the exhaustion began. Morning sickness arrived without warning. Some days she could barely keep food down. Other days she felt steady for hours before dizziness returned. She learned quickly that survival depended on routine, small meals, rest when she could get it, doctor appointments carefully written into a notebook she kept close. Money, once something she rarely thought about, became a constant calculation. She sat at the small kitchen table one evening, spreading bills across the surface. Rent, medical expenses, groceries. She traced numbers with her finger, adjusting plans again and again. The reality was clear. She would have to rebuild slowly. Still, she felt strangely focused. Every choice mattered now. Her community stepped in quietly without making her feel weak. A neighbor dropped off homemade meals and insisted she take them. Someone offered rides to appointments when she felt too tired to drive. Conversations lasted longer than expected, filled with practical advice and simple kindness. No one treated her like a failure. They treated her like family. One afternoon, while sitting outside a local gathering space, an older woman from the community sat beside her without saying much at first. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. Susan smiled faintly. "Some days better than others." "That's normal," the woman said. Strong doesn't mean never tired. The words stayed with her. At night, loneliness arrived differently than before. It wasn't the sharp loneliness of being ignored while living beside someone. It was quieter, the awareness that every decision now belonged entirely to her. She sometimes caught herself reaching for her phone, thinking to message Simon before remembering there was nothing left to say right now. He sent occasional texts asking if she was okay. She answered politely but briefly. Distance remained necessary. As her pregnancy progressed, her body changed faster than she expected. She stood in front of the mirror one evening, noticing the curve beginning to show. Fear rose again. Could she really do this alone? The question lingered until she placed both hands on her stomach and felt a faint movement. A flutter, small but unmistakable. Emotion rushed through her so suddenly she sat down. "You're real," she whispered. That moment shifted something inside her. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was preparing. Doctor visits confirmed what she had begun to suspect. Twins. The news stunned her. 2 lives, 2 futures depending on her strength. She laughed softly in disbelief before tears followed, not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of responsibility. Walking home afterward, she felt both terrified and determined. If she had been hesitant before, the hesitation disappeared now. She began planning with more focus. Budget adjustments became stricter. She took on small consulting work she could manage from home, careful not to push herself too hard. Every dollar saved felt like progress. The apartment slowly transformed. A small corner became a nursery area, simple but warm. Second-hand furniture arrived through community connections. Baby clothes folded neatly into drawers brought unexpected joy. Each item represented hope rather than loss. Yet difficult days still came. There were nights when she cried quietly from exhaustion, wondering if she had made the right choice. Nights when fear whispered that she wasn't ready. During one particularly hard evening, she sat by the window watching rain blur the city lights. "I don't know everything yet," she said softly, speaking to the unborn babies. "But I promise you this, you will grow up feeling safe. You will know you're loved." The words steadied her. She repeated that promise often afterward. Meanwhile, updates about Simon reached her indirectly through news headlines and former contacts. The company continued expanding, but rumors suggested internal tension, leadership changes, pressure from investors. She noticed the news without reacting. That chapter of her life felt farther away now. Her days filled with practical tasks, appointments, meal planning, resting when her body demanded it. Each routine built confidence she didn't realize she was gaining. One afternoon, she caught herself laughing at something on television, genuine and unforced. The sound surprised her. She hadn't laughed like that in a long time. Months passed this way, not easy, but steady. Susan realized resilience wasn't dramatic. It was waking up and doing what needed to be done, even when no one applauded. She grew stronger alongside the life she carried. The fear never disappeared entirely, but it stopped controlling her. By the final weeks of pregnancy, the apartment felt like home. Not because it was perfect, because it was honest. One night before bed, she sat quietly in the dim light, hands resting over her stomach as the twins moved gently. "We're going to be okay," she whispered again. This time, she believed it. Outside, the city moved on as always, unaware that inside one small apartment, a woman's life was being rebuilt piece by piece. And soon, everything was about to change again. The final weeks of pregnancy felt endless. Every movement required effort. Sleep came in short stretches. Susan moved carefully through her apartment, one hand often supporting her back, the other resting protectively over her stomach. The small space that once felt uncertain now held signs of preparation. Folded blankets, a small crib, tiny clothes waiting for lives she had not yet met. She read books late at night, learning everything she could, yet still feeling unprepared. Fear visited often, but it no longer ruled her decisions. When labor began, it started quietly, a steady pressure, rhythms growing stronger by the hour. She sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slowly, recognizing the moment she had anticipated for months had finally arrived. Her bag was already packed by the door. The drive to the hospital felt strangely calm. Streetlights passed overhead while she focused on breathing through each wave of pain. The city looked ordinary, unaware of the transformation taking place inside one car. Hours blurred together once she arrived. Nurses moved efficiently. Instructions came gently. Time lost shape as contractions grew stronger. Susan gripped the bed rails, eyes closed, drawing strength from the promise she had made to her children. "You will be loved. You will be safe." When the first cry finally filled the room, Emotion crashed through her all at once. Mason. Moments later came another cry, louder, urgent. Mike. Tears streamed down her face as the twins were placed against her chest. Tiny fingers curled instinctively, eyes closed, unaware of the journey that had brought them here. The pain faded into the background. She wasn't thinking about the past. She wasn't thinking about Simon. She was simply present. For the first time in years, she felt completely certain of who she was. The days that followed were exhausting and beautiful in equal measure. Sleep came in fragments. Feeding schedules blurred into night and day. She learned quickly that motherhood demanded everything, while giving back a kind of joy she hadn't expected. The apartment transformed again, now filled with soft cries and small sounds that made silence impossible. Friends from her community rotated through quietly, bringing meals, offering help without judgment. Laughter returned to the rooms naturally, not forced. Susan watched her sons sleep side by side and felt something settle deep inside her. She hadn't broken. She had changed. She no longer defined herself as the woman left behind by a successful husband. She became the center of a new life built on stability rather than appearances. Meanwhile, Simon's world continued moving at full speed. Headlines still praised growth, but the tone shifted subtly. Reports mentioned aggressive expansion strategies and internal restructuring. Longtime employees began leaving quietly. Analysts questioned decisions that once seemed obvious. From a distance, the company still looked strong. Up close, cracks were beginning to show. Simon sent messages occasionally asking about the twins. Susan responded with simple updates, their names, their health, milestones, nothing more. She never denied him information, but she kept boundaries clear. Her focus remained where it belonged. Weeks turned into months. Mason grew curious, always alert to sound. Mike preferred calm, settling easily against her shoulder. Their differences appeared early, and Susan found herself smiling at how distinctly they moved through the world even as infants. Each day brought challenges, sleepless nights, unexpected expenses, moments of overwhelm, yet she felt stronger navigating them than she ever had navigating corporate events or public appearances. Motherhood reshaped her priorities completely. One evening, while rocking both boys to sleep, she glanced around the apartment. Toys lay scattered across the floor. Laundry waited nearby. The space looked lived in, imperfect, real, and she felt peace. The betrayal that once dominated her thoughts began losing its power. It became part of her history rather than her identity. She realized healing wasn't dramatic. It happened quietly through repetition, feeding, comforting, showing up day after day. Across town, Simon sat in boardrooms facing harder questions from investors. Without Susan's steady perspective behind the scenes, decisions felt sharper, less grounded. Success required constant effort now. He didn't speak about regret openly, but it followed him. Susan didn't know the details, and she didn't need to. Her world revolved around two small humans who depended entirely on her. One morning, sunlight streamed through the window as Mason and Mike laughed together for the first time. The sound filled the room with unexpected warmth. Susan laughed too, holding them close. In that moment, she understood something clearly. She had spent years helping build an empire that impressed strangers. Now she was building something smaller, quieter, and infinitely more meaningful. She kissed each boy gently on the forehead. "You two saved me," she whispered softly. Because through them, she rediscovered herself. The fear that once defined her future had been replaced by purpose. Outside, life continued as usual. News cycles changed. Markets rose and fell. Titles shifted. Inside the apartment, a different kind of success was growing. One measured in safety, laughter, and love that asked for nothing in return. Susan looked out the window, feeling the weight of the past finally easing. The hardest part was over, and for the first time since walking away, she felt genuine hope for what came next. Time moved forward the way real life always does, quietly, one ordinary day at a time. For Susan, years passed through school mornings, packed lunches, late-night homework, and the endless cycle of responsibilities that came with raising twins. Mason and Mike grew quickly, filling the small apartment with energy that made the space feel larger than it was. Laughter became common again. Not the polite laughter from corporate events, but spontaneous moments, jokes shared over breakfasts, playful arguments about music, stories told at dinner that made all three of them lose track of time. Susan noticed early that her sons felt secure. They didn't grow up surrounded by luxury, but they grew up surrounded by attention. She listened when they spoke. She showed up when they needed her. Their world felt stable because she made sure it did. As they entered school, her own path began to shift. What started as small consulting work turned into something bigger. People sought her advice not only because of her experience in business, but because she spoke honestly about balance, leadership, and the personal cost of ambition without connection. She began mentoring young entrepreneurs, people building companies while struggling to protect their personal lives. Her guidance felt practical because it came from lived experience. Word spread quietly. Soon she was speaking at community programs, helping small business owners grow sustainably instead of chasing rapid expansion at any cost. Her focus remained human-centered, grounded in relationships rather than competition. Success returned to her life, but it looked different now. It wasn't measured by headlines or applause. It was measured by impact. The community around her grew stronger alongside her work. Local programs expanded. People shared resources. Collaboration replaced hierarchy. Susan watched businesses thrive under supportive leadership and felt a deep satisfaction she never found in corporate spotlight moments. Meanwhile, Mason and Mike absorbed those values naturally. They learned responsibility early, helping with small chores, understanding that effort mattered more than image. They asked questions about their father occasionally, and Susan answered honestly without bitterness. "He works hard," she would say, "and he cares about you." She never spoke with resentment. She allowed them space to build their own understanding. Simon visited when schedules aligned. The interactions remained polite but careful. The boys respected him, though their connection felt formal, shaped more by occasional visits than daily life. Susan noticed the distance, but never forced closeness. She trusted time to do its work. Across the city, Simon's world moved in the opposite direction. From the outside, his company still appeared successful. New offices opened. Press releases celebrated expansion. Yet inside the organization, pressure increased. Decisions grew faster, less deliberate. Longtime employees left quietly, replaced by people focused more on results than loyalty. Investors demanded bigger returns, pushing aggressive strategies that stretched the company thin. Without realizing it, Simon had built a culture fueled by urgency. The stability Susan once provided was gone. Board meetings became tense. Questions sharpened. Projects missed deadlines. He responded the only way he knew, working longer hours, pushing harder, believing effort alone could fix structural cracks. But effort without balance brought strain. Late at night, after meetings ended and offices emptied, he sometimes scrolled through photos on his phone, images of Mason and Mike as children, smiling beside Susan at park outings he rarely attended. The contrast unsettled him. Back in Susan's world, life felt fuller. Her apartment eventually became a modest house in a neighborhood she loved. Not extravagant, but warm. A place filled with books, music, and conversations around the dinner table. She no longer thought about betrayal daily. Pain softened into understanding. One evening, while watching Mason and Mike work on a school project together, she realized something quietly profound. She had stopped defining her life by what she lost. She defined it by what she protected. At the same time, Simon sat through another tense board meeting where financial projections failed to meet expectations. The room felt colder than usual. Questions about leadership grew more direct. He answered calmly, but fatigue showed beneath his confidence. Afterward, alone in his office, he looked out over the city lights and felt something he rarely admitted: loneliness. Success surrounded him, yet fulfillment felt distant. He thought about Susan unexpectedly, recalling how she used to challenge his ideas and slow him down when needed. He had once seen that as resistance. Now he wondered if it had been balance. The years had taken both of them in different directions. Susan moved toward meaning and connection. Simon moved toward status that felt increasingly difficult to maintain. Neither path was fully visible to the other yet. But the distance between them, emotional, personal, and philosophical, had grown larger than either could have imagined when they first separated. And time, quietly, prepared them for a future conversation neither was yet expecting. The pressure inside the company no longer hid behind polished presentations. Meetings stretched longer. Conversations grew sharper. Numbers that once impressed investors now invited scrutiny. What had looked unstoppable from the outside started showing strain from within. Simon felt it first in small ways. Executives questioned decisions openly instead of privately. Deadlines slipped. Partnerships that seemed promising collapsed unexpectedly. Reports landed on his desk filled with cautious language that sounded more like warning than optimism. He responded with the instincts that built his career, pushing harder, demanding clearer results, adding more meetings to already packed schedules. But the harder he drove forward, the more resistance appeared. Longtime employees who once trusted him began leaving quietly. Their departure notices arrived politely worded, yet each one felt like a loss he couldn't replace with talent alone. The culture had shifted. Fear replaced loyalty. Innovation turned into obligation. Simon rarely admitted it aloud, but he sensed control slipping. Outside the office, his personal life offered little balance. The relationship with Erin had ended years earlier, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with gradual distance. What began as excitement during long working nights faded once ordinary life replaced secrecy. The connection that once felt urgent simply dissolved. They went separate ways without much discussion. Simon told himself it was inevitable. Still, the emptiness that followed lingered longer than expected. Now, evenings often ended with him alone in a high-rise apartment overlooking the city. The view remained impressive, yet it no longer felt rewarding. Silence greeted him after every long day, and the absence of real conversation became impossible to ignore. Success surrounded him, but companionship did not. One night, after an especially tense board meeting, he stayed late at the office. The building quieted as lights shut off floor by floor until only his corner remained illuminated. He loosened his tie and leaned back in his chair. On his desk sat a photo frame turned slightly away from view. He reached for it slowly. The picture showed Susan laughing, Mason and Mike as toddlers clinging to her hands. The image was candid, taken during one of his early visits after the twins were born. He kept it hidden from visitors, not because he was ashamed, but because looking at it felt too personal for the world he operated in. He studied the photo longer than usual. Susan looked relaxed, grounded in a way he hadn't seen during their final years together. The boys looked happy, completely unaware of the complicated history surrounding them. Simon realized something uncomfortable. The life captured in that frame felt more genuine than the one he currently lived. He placed the photo back down carefully. Across the city, Susan prepared dinner while Mason and Mike discussed school projects loudly at the table. The house felt alive with movement, laughter, and small interruptions that never quite allowed silence to settle for long. Her work had grown steadily over the years. Mentorship programs expanded through community partnerships, helping small business owners build sustainable paths forward. Former corporate professionals sought her advice when they felt burned out or disconnected from their goals. She listened more than she lectured. People trusted her because she spoke about mistakes as openly as successes. The contrast between their worlds grew sharper with time. Simon's company fought to maintain momentum. Susan's work grew through trust. Back at the office, another report landed on Simon's desk highlighting declining morale. The words blurred together as fatigue settled in. He rubbed his eyes, feeling older than the man reflected in glossy magazine profiles. He thought about Mason and Mike more often now. They were teenagers, nearly adults. Conversations with them felt polite but careful, shaped by years of limited presence. They respected him, yet distance remained. He couldn't ignore the realization that he had missed countless moments while chasing growth. For the first time, regret felt less like a passing thought and more like a permanent companion. Late that evening, he walked through the empty office floor, the silence amplifying every step. He paused at the glass wall overlooking the city and saw his reflection staring back, successful by every measurable standard, yet visibly tired. He wondered when achievement stopped feeling meaningful. The answer arrived quietly in his mind when it stopped being shared. He returned to his desk and looked again at the hidden photo. The image stirred something unresolved, not just longing for Susan, longing for the version of himself who once valued connection as much as success. The idea of reaching out began forming slowly, not as a plan, but as a question. Would she even agree to see him? Did he deserve that conversation? He didn't know, but the thoughts stayed with him long after he left the office that night. As weeks passed, the company's struggles intensified. Board members pushed for restructuring. Media coverage shifted in tone, more skeptical than celebratory. Simon moved through interviews and meetings with practiced confidence, yet internally he felt increasingly disconnected. Every achievement felt temporary, every victory hollow. And each time he opened his phone and saw updates about Mason and Mike, milestones sent politely by Susan, the sense of distance sharpened. The past no longer felt like something finished. It felt unfinished. By the time he sat alone again in his office one quiet evening, the decision had almost made itself. He looked at the photo one more time. Then he opened his phone. His thumb hovered over Susan's contact. The audience might expect this to be the beginning of a grand reunion. But Simon wasn't certain what he was seeking anymore. Only that something needed to be said before time moved too far forward. And soon he would finally send the message that changed everything again. The message sat unsent for several minutes. Simon stared at the screen, reading the same short sentence again and again. Words that sounded simple in his head felt heavier once typed. "I'd like to see you, if you're willing." No explanation, no apology written out, just a request. He hesitated, thumb hovering above the screen. For a man used to making decisions quickly, this felt strangely difficult. Sending it meant acknowledging everything that had happened, the years past, the choices made, the distance that now defined their relationship. Finally, he pressed send. The message disappeared into the quiet of the office. He set the phone down and leaned back, suddenly unsure of what he expected. Relief didn't come. Instead, uncertainty settled in. Across the city, Susan was helping Mason and Mike finish dinner cleanup when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen casually at first. Then she paused. Simon's name. She opened the message slowly. The words were brief, careful. She read them once, then again. Mason noticed her expression. "Everything okay?" She smiled gently. "Yes. Just a message." She slipped the phone into her pocket and continued helping them, outwardly calm. Inside, however, old memories surfaced quietly, not pain, but awareness. 10 years. Enough time for people to change. Enough time for wounds to heal into perspective. Later that night, after the boys went upstairs, she sat alone on the balcony, the city lights flickering in the distance. She reread the message. Her first instinct wasn't anger. It was caution. What exactly did he want? Closure? Forgiveness? Another chance? She wasn't sure. She thought about the life she had built, the work she loved, the stability she created for her sons, the peace she fought hard to protect. Nothing about her current life felt unfinished. Still, avoiding the conversation entirely felt unnecessary. She wasn't the woman who walked away carrying uncertainty anymore. She trusted herself now. She typed a reply slowly. "One meeting. Public place." She stared at the words before sending them. No warmth, no hostility, just clarity. When Simon saw her response the next morning, he exhaled deeply. The simplicity of it told him everything he needed to know. She wasn't reopening the past. She was allowing a conversation. That distinction mattered. He spent the next few days distracted, replaying possible outcomes in his mind. He imagined apologies, explanations, maybe even a chance to rebuild something. Yet a quieter thought followed him. What if she didn't need anything from him anymore? Meanwhile, Susan approached the meeting differently. She didn't rehearse speeches. She didn't revisit old arguments. Instead, she focused on her routine. Morning coffee with Mason and Mike before school. Work sessions with entrepreneurs seeking guidance. Evening walks that helped her clear her mind. Her life felt full. The meeting became one item on a busy schedule, not a defining moment. That realization surprised her. Years ago, a message from Simon would have consumed her thoughts. Now, it barely unsettled her rhythm. Still, she prepared emotionally in one specific way. She reminded herself why boundaries mattered. This wasn't about romance. This was about honesty. The emotional stakes had shifted entirely. For Simon, the meeting carried hope mixed with regret. For Susan, it carried accountability. Days passed slowly for him and normally for her, highlighting just how different their worlds had become. At work, Simon struggled to concentrate. Board discussions felt distant. Numbers on screens lost meaning as his thoughts drifted toward what he might say when he finally sat across from Susan again. He realized he wasn't simply seeking forgiveness. He wanted understanding, maybe even from himself. One evening before the meeting, he looked again at the photo on his desk. Mason and Mike laughing beside Susan reminded him that time moved forward regardless of regret. He wondered if they blamed him. He wondered what Susan told them about the past. The uncertainty stayed with him. On the other side of the city, Susan folded laundry while listening to her sons argue playfully about weekend plans. Their confidence, their emotional steadiness, reminded her how far she had come. She recognized something important. Meeting Simon wasn't about reopening wounds. It was about acknowledging history without letting it define the present. The night before the meeting, she sat quietly after the house fell silent. She thought about the woman she used to be, waiting for attention, hoping for reassurance, afraid to lose what she helped build. That version of her felt distant now. She felt no need to prove anything. The next morning, she sent one final message confirming the time and location. Simple, direct, no extra words. Simon read it and felt a wave of nerves he hadn't experienced in years. The audience might expect a dramatic reunion, two people running back toward what they lost, but the truth felt different. This wasn't about reclaiming the past. It was about facing it honestly. As the meeting day approached, tension built quietly, not through conflict but through anticipation. Would they speak like strangers? Would old emotions resurface? Would the conversation change anything at all? Neither of them knew. What they did know was this: 10 years of choices had led to one table, one conversation, and one chance to finally speak without illusions. And when they met, the real story would begin to reveal what success had truly cost both of them. The cafe was quiet for a Saturday afternoon. Soft music played low enough not to interrupt conversation. Sunlight filtered through large windows, warming the wooden tables. Susan arrived early, choosing a seat near the window where she could see the entrance clearly. She felt calm, not nervous, not angry, simply prepared. When Simon walked in, she recognized him instantly despite the years. He looked older, tired around the eyes, his confidence slightly quieter than she remembered. He paused briefly when he saw her, as if confirming she was real. Susan stood politely as he approached. "Hi," he said. "Hi, Simon." They sat across from each other, a careful distance between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Simon glanced around before focusing on her again. "You look good." She smiled lightly. "Life's been good to me." He nodded slowly, as though that answer carried more meaning than it appeared. A server placed water on the table. The small interruption eased the tension just enough for conversation to begin. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet," Simon said. Susan folded her hands calmly. "You asked." "I listened." He took a breath, clearly searching for the right words. "I've thought about this conversation for a long time," he admitted. "About how things ended, about what I did." She waited quietly, letting him speak. "I made choices I didn't fully understand at the time," he continued. "I thought I was chasing the right things: growth, success, momentum. I convinced myself everything else would fall into place." His voice softened. "It didn't." Susan studied him carefully. She noticed sincerity but also uncertainty, a man still figuring out his own story. "I'm not here to make excuses," he said quickly. I understand now what I lost." She nodded once. "And what was that?" she asked. He hesitated. "You, our family, stability." The honesty landed gently, not dramatically. Susan leaned back slightly, expression steady. "You didn't lose me because of one mistake," she said calmly. "You lost me because you stopped seeing me while I was standing right beside you." The words were direct, but not cruel. Simon lowered his gaze. "I know," he said quietly. "I didn't realize it then." "That's the problem," she replied. "You didn't notice until everything was already gone." Silence followed. Outside, people walked past the windows, unaware of the conversation reshaping years of history. Simon exhaled slowly. "I thought success would fix things, that once the company stabilized I'd have time again." "And did it?" she asked. He shook his head. "No." She watched him carefully. In the past, she would have filled the silence to make him comfortable. Now she allowed space for truth to settle. "I'm not angry anymore," she said after a moment. "That part ended a long time ago." He looked up, surprised. "I'm glad," he said softly. She continued, voice calm but firm. "But peace doesn't mean forgetting." He nodded slowly. The conversation felt different from what he expected. There was no accusation to defend against, no emotional chaos to navigate. Instead, there was clarity. "You seem different," he said. "I am," she replied. "Life required me to grow." He smiled faintly, almost sad. "I can see that." He leaned forward slightly. "I wish I had understood sooner." Susan's expression softened, though her boundaries remained clear. Most people understand only after consequences arrive. Simon's hands rested still on the table. "I've regretted it for years," he admitted. "Not just leaving. The way I handled everything." She listened without interruption. You built a life without me, he added quietly. Yes, she said, because I had to. The truth sat between them, undeniable. Simon looked at her with a mixture of admiration and regret. I thought maybe... He started, then stopped. She tilted her head slightly. Maybe what? He hesitated, then shook his head. I don't know. She understood what he didn't say. Maybe there was a chance to begin again. Maybe time could be rewound. But neither of them spoke those words aloud. Susan's calm presence made something clear. She wasn't waiting for rescue or reconciliation. She had already moved forward. The conversation shifted naturally toward the twins. Simon asked about school, interests, how they were doing. She answered honestly, mentioning their independence and humor. They're good kids, she said. I know, he replied quietly. I wish I'd been around more. Her eyes softened briefly. You can't change the past, she said, but you can decide what you do with what's left. He absorbed her words slowly. For the first time, Simon realized this meeting wasn't about winning her back. It was about understanding the person she had become without him. Before he could respond, the cafe door opened behind him. Susan glanced toward the entrance. Her expression shifted slightly, not surprise, but quiet readiness. And in that moment, the conversation was about to change again. The cafe door opened with a soft chime. Simon turned slightly at the sound, expecting another customer. Instead, he froze. Mason and Mike walked in together, taller than he remembered, carrying the easy confidence of teenagers who knew where they belonged. They spotted Susan immediately and smiled before making their way over. Simon blinked, surprised. You didn't tell me they were coming, he said quietly. Susan's tone remained calm. I wanted this to be natural. The boys greeted her first, leaning down for brief hugs. Hey, Mom, Mason said. Traffic was worse than we thought, Mike added. Then they turned towards Simon. Hi, Dad, Mason said politely. The word landed softly, but without warmth. Simon stood halfway before sitting again, unsure whether to shake hands or hug them. He settled for a smile. Hey, it's good to see you both. Good to see you too, Mike replied, pulling out a chair. The distance was subtle but unmistakable. No hostility, no anger, just familiarity shaped by time spent apart. The boys ordered drinks and joined the conversation effortlessly, discussing school projects and upcoming plans. Susan listened more than she spoke, allowing the moment to unfold without direction. Simon noticed how easily they talked to her, interrupting playfully, sharing quick jokes, leaning comfortably into her presence. With him, their tone remained respectful but careful. He felt the difference immediately. Mason spoke about a science competition. Mike mentioned a music program he had joined. Simon asked questions, trying to connect, but each answer felt slightly formal, as though they were speaking to someone they admired from a distance rather than someone deeply known. Susan watched quietly. She didn't step in to bridge gaps. She simply let reality speak for itself. Simon realized something painful then. She had never turned the boys against him. Their distance wasn't taught. It was earned through absence. The conversation moved naturally, yet he felt himself observing more than participating. Moments passed where he wasn't sure when to speak or how to join in. Years of missed dinners, missed weekend activities, missed ordinary days suddenly felt very real. At one point, Mason laughed at something Mike said, and Susan joined in. The sound filled the table with warmth. Simon smiled, but inside he felt a quiet ache. This rhythm existed without him. He leaned back slightly, watching the three of them together. For years he had imagined a reunion where he could fix everything, where explanations might rebuild what was broken. Now he understood that time didn't wait for explanations. It moved forward and built new patterns. When the boys stepped away briefly to grab their drinks, Simon turned toward Susan. You planned this, he said softly. She met his eyes calmly. I didn't plan anything. I just didn't hide life from you. He nodded slowly. They seem happy. They are, she said. There was no pride in her tone, only truth. The boys returned and conversation continued. Simon listened closely, trying to memorize details, favorite subjects, future plans, inside jokes he didn't fully understand. He realized he was hearing about parts of their lives for the first time. The weight of that realization settled heavily. Eventually, Mason checked the time. We should head out soon. Susan nodded. We've got plans later. Simon hesitated. Can I see you guys again soon? Mike glanced briefly at Mason before answering. Yeah, We can figure something out. Polite. Careful. The response wasn't rejection, but it wasn't closeness either. As they stood to leave, Simon felt an unexpected urgency. "I'm glad you came," he said sincerely. Mason smiled faintly. "Thanks for meeting us." They hugged Susan before giving Simon brief, awkward embraces, respectful but restrained. Then they walked toward the door. Simon watched them go, the realization hitting fully as the door closed behind them. He had not just lost a marriage years ago. He had lost time he could never reclaim. The cafe felt quieter now. He sat back down slowly, hands resting on the table. "I thought," he began, searching for words, "I thought I came here to fix things with you." Susan looked at him gently. "And what do you think now?" He exhaled deeply. "I think I came here because I didn't realize how much I missed." She nodded softly. "This was never about us getting back together, Simon." He understood now. The twist wasn't dramatic. It was simple, undeniable truth. The story wasn't about winning Susan back. It was about recognizing what truly mattered before it was too late. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I thought I had more time." She held his gaze, compassionate but firm. "Most people think that—" He looked down at his hands, the confident CEO reduced for a moment to a man confronting consequences he couldn't negotiate away. The ambition that once felt like purpose now seemed small compared to what he had watched at the table moments earlier. Effortless connection, years of shared experience he hadn't been part of. Susan stood slowly, gathering her bag. "You still have time to be present now," she said. "But it won't look like the past. You have to accept that." He nodded, swallowing hard. As she prepared to leave, he realized something he hadn't expected. He didn't feel anger. He felt respect. Respect for the woman who had rebuilt a life without bitterness, who allowed him to see the truth without humiliation. And for the first time, Simon understood that some losses weren't punishments. They were lessons. The cafe door closed behind Susan as she left. Simon remained at the table a little longer, staring at the empty chairs where his sons had sat, recognizing that the future ahead would depend not on grand gestures, but on small, consistent efforts. Time couldn't be reversed, but maybe it could still be used wisely. The weeks after the cafe meeting moved quietly, but something had shifted. Simon began reaching out to Mason and Mike more consistently, short messages first, simple check-ins that didn't demand immediate closeness. He asked about school, sports, music, things he should have known years earlier. Sometimes they replied quickly. Sometimes they didn't. He kept trying anyway. This time, there were no grand promises, only steady effort. The first dinner they shared afterward felt awkward but honest. Conversation paused often as they searched for common ground, yet the tension softened gradually. Simon listened more than he spoke, resisting the instinct to impress them with stories about work. He noticed how different they were from each other. Mason thoughtful and analytical, Mike expressive and direct. He wondered how many moments had shaped those personalities without him there to witness them. The realization hurt, but it also motivated him. Rebuilding didn't happen through one emotional conversation. It happened through consistency. Across town, Susan watched the changes unfold with quiet satisfaction. She never pushed the boys toward their father, but she never blocked the door either. She believed relationships deserve space to grow on their own terms. Her focus remained on her work and the community she had helped strengthen over the years. One afternoon, her mentorship program received national recognition for helping small businesses grow sustainably while prioritizing people over profits. Interviews followed, along with invitations to speak at conferences. Former employees from Simon's company began joining her initiatives, drawn by the culture she created. Collaborative, respectful, grounded. When someone congratulated her on building something larger than expected, she smiled and replied simply, "It's not larger. It's healthier." The success felt different from her past life. It didn't demand sacrifice of identity. It reinforced it. Meanwhile, Simon watched from a distance as news about her work circulated. He felt pride mixed with humility. Years earlier, he might have viewed her achievements as competition. Now he saw them as proof of what she had always valued, people before image. Their occasional conversations became easier. They discussed the twins more openly, sharing updates without tension. Respect replaced old wounds. One evening, after dropping Mason and Mike back at Susan's home, Simon lingered near the driveway as the sun lowered across the street. "You've done an incredible job," he said quietly. Susan looked at him calmly. "We both did what we could, with what we had." He shook his head slightly. "You did more than that." She didn't argue. Silence settled briefly, comfortable rather than strained. I used to think success meant building something everyone admired, Simon admitted. And now? She asked. He glanced toward the house where the boys' laughter echoed faintly from inside. Now I think success means not losing the people who matter while you're building. She nodded softly. That's a lesson many people learn late. He looked at her carefully. Do you ever miss us? Susan paused, considering the question honestly. I miss who we were before everything became about growth and status, she said gently. But I don't miss the life we had at the end. Her words carried no bitterness, only truth. Simon accepted the answer with a quiet nod. He no longer sought a reunion. What he felt now was respect for her strength, her clarity, and the life she built without resentment. Months passed. The connection with his sons grew slowly but genuinely. Shared meals turned into occasional weekend activities. Conversations deepened. The distance didn't disappear completely, but trust began forming through repeated effort. Simon learned to show up consistently rather than dramatically. Susan watched from a distance, content to let their relationship develop naturally. One evening they met again briefly after a community event where Susan spoke about leadership and responsibility. The crowd had gone, leaving the space quiet. You changed the way people think about success, Simon said. She smiled lightly. People change themselves when they're ready. He laughed softly. You always saw things differently. And you always moved too fast, she replied, friendly rather than critical. They stood together for a moment, not as former spouses or unresolved lovers, but as two people who understood each other in a new way. Before they parted, Simon spoke quietly. I thought I came back to win you again. She smiled, warm but steady. And what did you find? He looked toward the doorway where Mason and Mike waited. Perspective, he said. She nodded. That's enough. As they walked away in opposite directions, there was no dramatic farewell, only acceptance. Love had changed shape. It no longer demanded possession or reunion. It existed as respect, growth, and lessons carried forward. And before we close this story, if it made you reflect on your own choices, take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your engagement helps stories like this reach more people who might need these lessons today. Tell us in the comments, do you believe second chances are about getting someone back or becoming better because of what you lost? The final truth of their story settled quietly. Success without presence eventually feels empty. Neglect wounds more deeply than loud conflict. Healing doesn't come from revenge. It comes from rebuilding a life so meaningful that the past no longer controls it. Sometimes love ends without hate. And sometimes the strongest comeback isn't proving anyone wrong. It's living well enough that peace becomes your answer. Susan walked back toward her home, her sons waiting inside, her work continuing to grow. Simon walked away understanding that time could not be reversed, only respected. And for both of them, that realization was enough.